Arizona Territory, March 1879. The wind cut low through the red rock canyons near Oak Creek, whispering through the mesquite like it had secrets to carry. Francesca Greer pressed one hand to the brim of her hat, the other steadying the rifle slung across her back as she picked her way down the narrow path that wound along the canyon wall. She had come for herbs, wild yarrow, and desert sage, but what she found instead stopped her cold. A man lay crumpled at the bottom of the ravine, half hidden in the shadow of a boulder. His horse was nowhere in sight, and blood stained the grit beneath him. Francesca swore under her breath and scrambled down the loose slope without thinking twice. "Sir." "Hey, can you hear me?" she asked, crouching beside him, one eye open, dazed and unfocused. "I reckon I can," he muttered. His voice was dry as riverbed dust. His right leg was bent at a wrong angle and his shirt clung wet to his side. "Do not move," she said. "You'll make it worse." He tried to lift his head. "You an angel or something?" "I am a widow who does not have time for nonsense," she said. "Hold still." She tore strips from the hem of her skirt, working quickly. A jagged gash ran along his ribs, likely from a fall or a bullet, maybe both. She cleaned it with water from her canteen, then pressed cloth to the wound. "What is your name?" she asked. "Zeke," he rasped. "Zeke Harlan." "Well, Zeke Harlan," she said, voice flat but steady. "You are lucky I came down this canyon today." He winced as she adjusted the pressure. "I ain't feelin' too lucky." She wrapped his ribs, then turned to his leg. "This will hurt. Already does." She set the bone as best she could, ignoring his groan, then she built a splint from nearby sticks and bound it tight with more cloth. He passed out halfway through. Francesca looked up at the sun. It would be dark in 2 hours. She had to get him out of here. She whistled sharp and high. Her mule, Daisy, came trotting around a bend, ears twitching. By the time dusk settled, she had Zeke tied to the mule with rope and blankets, his weight leaning against her shoulder as they made the slow climb out of the canyon. He never woke, not even when they reached her cabin tucked beneath the cottonwoods near the creek. She laid him on her bed, stoked the fire, and poured hot water into a basin. She worked through the night cleaning, stitching, watching. The desert got cold after sundown, and she kept the fire high. Every so often, he murmured something in his sleep. Names, a place called Mescal Ridge. And once, just once, he said, "Do not leave me." She did not. By morning, his fever had broken. She sat beside him, arms crossed, eyelids heavy. Her long, dark braid hung over one shoulder and her boots were still caked with red dust. She had not slept. When he opened his eyes, she was watching him. "You're still here," he whispered. She nodded. "You made it through the night." He tried to sit up, then flinched. "What the hell happened? You fell or someone pushed you?" "Either way, I found you bleeding out in the canyon." His eyes moved slowly around the cabin. "This your home?" "Yes." "You live alone?" Francesca hesitated. "Yes." Zeke looked at her for a long moment. His gaze was clear now, and something about it made her stomach dip. "You saved my life," he said. "I did what anyone should." "No," he said quietly. "Most people would have kept riding." She looked away. "Well, I did not." He nodded once, like he was filing that away, then he glanced at the window. Morning light spilled in through the glass, soft and golden. "I will not forget this," he said. "You will," Francesca replied. "Men always do." But he did not answer. He just watched her as if memorizing her face. He stayed 2 nights. She fed him broth and tea, kept his leg propped with pillows, and only spoke when necessary. She was not cold, just careful. But he talked now and then about horses and storms and the ranch he once worked near Prescott. He said he had no family left. She did not ask more. On the 3rd morning, he said he could walk with help. "You should rest another day," she said. "I cannot," he said. "I have to ride." She helped him to the door, one arm beneath his. He turned at the steps. "You still have not told me your name." "Francesca Greer." Zeke gave her a look that made her feel like he had known it already. "Thank you, Francesca Greer." She watched him limp away, leading a borrowed horse she had saddled for him. That night she stood at her window long after dark, wondering if she would ever see him again. The next morning, just after sunrise, there was a knock at her door. Francesca opened it and froze. Zeke stood on her porch, freshly shaven, wearing a clean shirt and a coat that looked too new. His limp was still there, but less sharp. In his hand was a small box. "I know it is fast," he said, voice low, "but I nearly died yesterday. And the only thing I could think about was you." She stared at the box. He opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring. "I know you have been alone a long time," he said. "So have I, but I do not want to be any more. I want to wake up next to you. I want to fix your roof and plant a garden out back and sit by the fire with you when we are old." Francesca did not move. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "I will wait if you tell me to," Zeke said, "but I had to ask." She looked at him, at the ring, at the man who had nearly died in her arms. Then she stepped forward, reached for his hand, and closed her fingers over his. "You did not even bring breakfast," she said softly. "I can go get some," he said. She shook her head and pulled him inside. "I do not need breakfast," she said. "I just need you," and then, finally, she smiled. By late April, the cottonwoods along the creek had leafed out in full, their green flickering in the wind like coins. Zeke built a fence without being asked, cutting posts from mesquite and hauling them in by hand. Francesca watched from the porch, needlework in her lap, though her hands barely moved. She wasn't used to the sound of another man's hammer on her land, nor the way her house suddenly felt like it was holding its breath between tasks. "Fence'll keep the mule from wandering," he said one morning, sweat darkening his collar. "She never wanders far," Francesca replied, still. He drove another nail into the crossbeam. "Feels better to have it done." They didn't talk about the ring again, not in words. She hadn't returned it, hadn't worn it either. It sat on the windowsill in the kitchen, catching the morning light. Zeke didn't push. He showed up each day with something repaired or cleaned, something made better. One afternoon, storm clouds built in the east. Francesca was shelling beans on the back stoop when Zeke came around from the barn, his shirt rolled up past his elbows. "You ever been out to Walnut Draw?" he asked, brushing sawdust from his hands. "I've no reason to go that far. There's a cottonwood there bigger than any I've seen. Be good to take a walk before the rain comes." She glanced at the sky, then set the bowl aside and stood. "All right." The path stretched narrow through sagebrush and scattered prickly pear. They didn't speak much. The wind moved through the grass in slow waves and the sun dipped behind the hills. When they reached the draw, the tree stood there broad-trunked and silent, branches twisting high like arms in prayer. Zeke touched the bark. "My father carved his name in a tree like this once. Said it was the only way to make a mark that stayed." Francesca stepped closer, her boots crunching dry leaves. "What happened to him?" "Caught in a flash flood outside Bisbee. I was 12. She studied his face, the new lines near his mouth that hadn't been there when they met. "You've been on your own a long time," he nodded. "So have you." They sat beneath the tree, backs to the trunk. Thunder rolled somewhere north, low and distant. "He was quiet," she said after a long while. "My husband, not unkind, just tired." Zeke didn't look at her. "You loved him?" "I wanted to." The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It felt like something being built, plank by plank. Zeke finally turned his head. "You don't have to say yes. But I'll keep showing up until you tell me to stop." Francesca picked up a fallen branch and traced a line in the dirt. "I know." The wind picked up, stirring her braid against her cheek. She didn't brush it away. That night the rain came. They reached the cabin just before it hit, boots muddy, hair damp with mist. Zeke took off his coat and hung it by the door. Francesca lit the oil lamp and set it on the table. The fire popped in the hearth. "Stay," she said without turning around. He stepped closer. "You sure?" She nodded. Zeke moved to the window and picked up the ring. He didn't offer it this time, just held it in both hands. Francesca came to stand beside him. Her fingers brushed his. "I want to wear it," she said. "Not because I owe you anything, but because I want to know what comes next." He didn't answer. He just slid the ring onto her finger, then wrapped her hand in his like he was anchoring them both. Outside, the storm rolled on. But inside the cabin, the air felt still, like something long unsettled had finally come to rest. By the 1st of June, Zeke had moved his saddle and gear into the lean-to behind the cabin. Francesca hadn't asked him to, and he hadn't made a show of it. He just started spending his nights there, rising early to draw water, splitting kindling before she came out for the morning. The rhythm of their days changed without ceremony. She didn't mention the ring on her hand, and he didn't touch it once it was there. They didn't speak often about what they were building, but it held, all the same. One morning, Francesca stood at the creek's edge with her skirts pinned up, washing linens against the smooth rock she favored. The sky was wide and cloudless, the kind that pressed down on the shoulders. Zeke approached from the sycamore stand, carrying a half-full sack of flour and a scowl. "Storekeep in Jerome says there's a man asking after a woman fitting your description," he said. "Riding a dun mare, wore a red bandana and didn't give a name." She wrung out the sheet in her hands, eyes steady on the water. "Did he say what he wanted?" "Only that he was looking for someone who left behind debt." Her jaw shifted, but not her gaze. "That would be Julian Mackey. He's not owed anything but silence." Zeke didn't press. He stepped beside her and crouched near the bank. "You want me to go speak to him?" "No," she said. "He feeds on trouble, better to let him wear himself down looking." She lifted the damp sheet into the basket and stood. Zeke watched her, unsure whether to follow or let her walk. "When I left Wyoming Territory," she said, "I had $6, a mule, and bruises I covered with a scarf. If he's come all this way just to remind me of that, he'll leave disappointed." Zeke reached for the basket before she could. "You don't have to explain." "I do," she said. "Because you're here now, and I don't want shadows between us." Back at the cabin, she hung the linens to dry while he shelled pecans in the shade. The silence between them had changed shape, no longer heavy, just honest. Later that evening, she found him oiling the hinges on the barn door, his shirt damp with sweat. "You fixed the latch," she said. "It was sticking." I'd stopped noticing. He wiped his hands and leaned against the frame. "That happens when you live with something long enough." She stepped closer, arms crossed. "I never thought I'd share my land. I never thought I'd stop running." The lantern inside the barn flickered behind him, catching the scar near his temple she hadn't asked about yet. She reached up and touched it lightly. "Was it a horse?" "No," he said. "It was a man with a grudge and a bottle. I was 17 and thought I could talk him down." Her hand dropped. "Did you?" He smiled, just a little. "Not that time." She looked past him to the corral where Daisy stood dozing. "I've got a spare acre by the bluff. Good for beans, maybe even corn if we get rain. I'll start clearing it in the morning." "Not alone," she said. That night she didn't let him return to the lean-to. She left the door open behind her, and when he stepped inside, he didn't speak. She unlaced her boots and set them neatly beside the hearth. He hung his coat on the peg and waited. "I never knew," she said, turning to face him, "how quiet a home could feel with someone else in it." He crossed to her slowly, as if afraid to make the floor creak. "I want to build it with you, Francesca." Her reply was a whisper against his chest. "You already are." She lay beside him that night wrapped in cotton sheets and the softness of his breathing. No ghosts followed her into sleep, no footsteps in her dreams. Just the steady warmth of a man who'd handed her more than a ring. He'd handed her a life not built from escape, but from choosing to stay. By late June, the soil behind the cabin had turned soft under their hands. Francesca knelt beside the rows with a small spade, pressing pinto bean seeds 3 knuckles deep. Zeke worked beside her, sleeves rolled past his elbows, sun catching the curve of his neck. They'd cleared the plot together in 3 days, hauling stones and root bundles until their palms blistered. Neither had mentioned what it meant, planting something that would take months to rise. "Hard to guess if we'll get enough rain," Zeke said, brushing dirt from his thumb. "You can't wait for guarantees to begin," she replied. He glanced over. "That how you started here?" "I started because I didn't know what else to do." She sat back on her heels. "But I stayed because I wanted to see something grow." That night a letter arrived. A ranch hand from Prescott brought it by horseback, a square of thick paper folded clean and sealed with wax. Francesca turned it in her hands before opening it in the doorway. The writing inside was careful, each word pressed tight and deliberate. She held it out to Zeke without a word. He read it once, then again slower. "Your brother's alive," he said. She nodded, arms crossed. "You said you didn't have family." "I thought he died in Kansas. There was a fire during the war. He was 17. I never heard from him again." Zeke folded the letter and handed it back. "He wants you to come east. He says he built a smithy in Missouri, that he's got a wife, 2 boys, that he never stopped wondering if I made it." Zeke studied her face. "You thinking of going?" "I don't know. I buried the thought of him a long time ago." She looked out toward the hills. "But I remember the way he whistled when he walked. I remember how he wouldn't sleep unless the door was latched." Zeke didn't speak. She turned back toward the house. "If I go, it wouldn't be to stay. This is my home now." The next morning she was up before first light, packing bread and jerky into a linen sack. Zeke saddled the mule, checked the cinch, and tied off the bedroll behind the cantle. "I'll ride with you as far as the river fork," he said. "You don't need to. I want to." They rode in silence, the trail narrowing through cottonwood and aspen. At the fork she pulled back on the reins. "I'll be gone 5 days, maybe 6. I'll be here." She reached for his hand and squeezed it once. "Keep the beans watered," he nodded but didn't let go right away. "I will." When she returned, the garden had doubled in size. Rows of corn now stood beside the beans, little green flags pushing up from the earth. The cabin smelled faintly of ash and rosemary. She found Zeke on the porch, sharpening a draw knife. "He has your eyes," she said, setting her sack down. "Your brother. And his oldest boy has your same quiet way of listening." Zeke set the blade aside. "You glad you went?" She sat beside him. "It's settled something. He's whole, he's safe. And I know now that I didn't lose everything." They sat with that for a while. Francesca leaned her head against his shoulder. "You built more fence while I was gone. Seemed like the thing to do. You always working on something." He looked down at her. "I like making things last." She tilted her chin until their eyes met. "Then stay." "I already have," he said. She kissed him then, not out of longing but out of certainty. The kind that had taken root slow and deep, like the seeds behind their cabin, quiet but undeniable. And when the sun dropped behind the ridge, the two of them sat there still, hands clasped, the air heavy with summer and promise. By mid-July, the rains came in short, heavy bursts that left the creek brimming and the garden thick with green. The corn reached knee-height, and Francesca tied string between sticks to keep the quail out. In the cooler hours, Zeke worked over a slatted box he said would be a root cellar once he dug deep enough. They'd talked about building it since the spring, but now he measured each board with a kind of quiet patience that made her stop and watch from the porch, one hand resting on her growing belly. She hadn't told him yet. Not because she feared his reaction, Zeke had never taken a step away from her, but because saying it aloud would make it real in a way nothing else had. When she finally did, it was evening and the smell of river mint hung in the air. He was washing his hands at the pump, sleeves damp, hair curling at the ends from sweat. "I think it's time to build a cradle," she said. Zeke turned slowly, water dripping from his fingers. "You sure?" She nodded, and his face changed in a way she hadn't seen before, not surprise or fear, but something softer, as if a weight he didn't know he carried had lifted. He crossed the yard and laid a hand on her side just above her waistband. "You feel all right, mostly. Tired sometimes. Hungry always, but I'm well." He kissed her forehead, then her temple, and rested his palm there a moment longer. "We'll make it good for them, I swear it." "I know," she said. They spent the next days clearing the brush behind the barn where the blackberry brambles had overtaken the fence. Zeke said it'd be a good place for a chicken coop and maybe a smokehouse later on. Francesca didn't argue. She liked the way his plans stretched into seasons, into years. One morning, a wagon creaked up the road, wheels sticky with mud. The driver was a woman near Francesca's age, face browned from sun, a boy on the seat beside her holding a wooden flute. She introduced herself as Nora Mayfield, said she'd bought the plot 2 ridges east and was looking for help setting in a well. Most folks steer clear of the draw in summer, Francesca said, shading her eyes. I wasn't raised to wait on permission, Nora replied. Zeke stepped forward. I can ride out tomorrow, take a look. The boy offered Francesca the flute. I made it, he said. It whistles like a hawk if the wind's right, she crouched to take it. That's a fine thing, thank you. After they left, Zeke leaned against the porch rail. It'd be good having neighbors. Francesca twirled the flute between her fingers. It would. That night, she took out the quilt she'd started years ago, squares of old shirts and flour sacks stitched by hand. She spread it across the bed and began sewing the border at last. Zeke watched from the rocker, whittling a spoon for the cradle. You ever think we'd get here? She asked. He looked around the room, the polished stove, the shelf of dried herbs, the candle burning low. No, he said. But I never wanted anything more. They married in August beneath the sycamores, just the two of them and Nora and her boy as witnesses. Francesca wore her mother's brooch pinned to her collar, and Zeke shaved with hot water and lye soap until his cheeks were smooth as river stone. The vows were simple, spoken without flourish, the kind that could be kept through drought and flood both. Afterward, they shared bread and pickled peaches on the porch. The boy played his flute, and the chickens from Nora's wagon clucked in the yard. As the sun lowered, Zeke reached for Francesca's hand. We'll take it one day at a time, he said. She rested her head against his shoulder. That's all I ever wanted. By the time the child came on the first cold morning in November, the trees had gone bare and the creek had quieted. Nora stayed through the night, boiling water and keeping the fire stoked. When the cries came, they were strong and sure. Francesca wept, not from pain, but from the sound of new life filling the cabin. Zeke held their daughter in both arms, blinking hard as he looked from her to Francesca. She's perfect, just like her mother. Francesca reached up and touched his jaw. She's ours. All of her? They named her Clara after the river that had never run dry years past. The garden grew wider. The root cellar filled with potatoes and squash. Neighbors came and stayed. Zeke taught Clara to ride bareback, and Francesca taught her to read by lamplight, her finger tracing each word slow and careful. On quiet evenings, when the wind moved gently through the cottonwoods, they all sat on the porch, Zeke's arm around Francesca. Clara curled between them like she belonged to the land as much as they did. And she did. They all did. Nothing grand ever happened again. No fights, no fires, no men from the past bringing trouble, just seasons, just love, just a life made full by work and patience and the tender way two people chose each other every day without needing to be asked, and it was enough, more than enough.